Hello, and thank you everyone for joining us today for this webinar on Is AI the Silver Bullet Against COVID-19? My name is Joanna Gordon. I'm an INSEAD alum from December '04, and I'm the organizer of Transform AI, an annual conference designed to help business leaders really sort of wrap their head around the topic of AI and understand better how to deploy and leverage it in the best way for business and society as a whole. Today's webinar is part of the Tech Talks organized by Digital at INSEAD. You know, digital technologies are taking a central role in this COVID-19 crisis, and we've seen technology companies together with governments sort of multiplying their efforts to respond to the pandemic and its collaterals globally. And many questions are emerging on the future of the digital economy, business, management, society post-pandemic. And so this is a new series of talks that INSEAD launched, really looking at exploring how COVID-19 is reshaping the global digital transformation, and it features, you know, faculty in conversation with leading industry practitioners. So very excited to have everyone here today. So as COVID became a global concern, not a day went by without AI being mentioned in the press as playing a critical role in combating this pandemic and as a tool to help save lives and livelihoods. And so we've seen, you know, especially in the beginning, you know, researchers sort of scrambling to apply AI to everything from drug discovery to interpreting medical scans to sort of trying to predict how AI might evolve. However, you know, you have some that sort of say that despite the plethora of ideas and COVID-19, you know, is mostly being fought on the grounds with maybe some sort of traditional old weapons, manual contact tracing, you know, plastic screens and paint on the pavement as sort of the best ways to enforce social distancing advice. So what I'm really hoping today in this webinar is by looking at how and where AI is having an impact in addressing the current crisis, and not just, and also looking at how current AI systems have reacted to the crisis. Can we identify lessons on what, you know, business leaders and companies need to do in order to implement AI so that it can truly provide tangible and scalable results? You know, modern AI has no doubt made huge progress, and billions of people are using it every day. But I think we continue hearing from real managers in real companies that it's a lot more challenging than expected to shift to an AI-first strategy. So today, for today's webinar, we have two fascinating individuals that, you know, hopefully are going to help shed some light on all of this and give us some insight. And with that note, I am going to invite, first of all, welcome our two amazing speakers today. And I'm going to start out with Manoj. Manoj, good morning. You are calling in from Texas this morning.
Morning, Joanna. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Now, I'm going to have you introduce yourself, but, you know, one of the things about Manoj that stands out is I think he's one of the, you know, executive chairman of Cognitive Scale. He'll explain what Cognitive Scale does, but more than anything else, I think you're really one of the first executives to really, who really took, you know, what was happening in AI research and started applying it in a business context. So, you know, as I think everybody will see from your days at Watson to the myriad of other things you've done, you definitely are one of the strongest voices on this topic today. So,
thank you. Again, thanks to INSEAD and you for inviting me. Just a quick summary of my background. As you said, Joanna, I've been very passionate about this whole topic about how do you apply AI for good. And in summary, my background, currently I'm the chairman of a company called Cognitive Scale. It's an exciting company that's applying AI for extending human capabilities, not replacing human beings, and also focusing on this topic that I call as trusted AI. How do you trust AI? You know, we are moving to a world where more and more decisions are being given to machines. So how do you build trusted systems? Also a nonprofit called AI Global, which focuses on enabling a responsible and ethical AI being adopted. So those are my current focus areas. I'm a venture capitalist. I have a venture fund that invests in AI startup. Before that, I had the privilege of being IBM's first general manager for running IBM Watson, taking it from IBM Research and applying it in business. I did that for the first 3 years, then went out and created my own venture fund. I continue to be very focused on, again, civic and social issues with AI, and both through my fund as well as through my former role as a chairman of the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas, San Antonio part, is to really get government and policymakers and businesses and research all looking at AI through the lens of outcomes and ethics, and not as much as just data and machine learning models. And I look forward to discussing more of this in the next few minutes.
Fantastic. And just, you know, I think one of the things just to point out, not a medical doctor in any shape or form, but I think Watson, some of the first real applications were in the healthcare industry. So hopefully we can sort of, and since you were there as one of the first general managers of Watson, sort of tap into that experience. Now I want to turn to Pavel, who is an assistant professor of marketing. But as you'll quickly see, I think, Pavel, I think marketing was just one of the many departments where you could have ended up in at INSEAD. So I will sort of let you sort of give over some of your background. But again, definitely a strong AI experience and one of the top MBA professors around teaching AI strategy.
Thank you very much, Joanna. And thank you all for joining this webinar. Very happy to discuss interesting things about COVID and its relationship to artificial intelligence. So just briefly on my background, I'm a faculty member at INSEAD, where I focus on research on digital marketplaces and online platforms. In particular, how we can use data to design these better. I studied mostly in the US and a little bit in England as well. And I was a member of a Harvard and Stanford-based machine learning startup, which now has over 100 employees and which focused on working with companies in retail industries, in e-commerce, but also in healthcare and insurance. On the top right of the slide, I have a photo from the class that I teach at INSEAD. This is the Artificial Intelligence Strategy MBA class from back when we had classes with people in them. So this is a class that I do where we talk about what different companies are doing in the domain of artificial intelligence, invite speakers from the industry to come by and tell us about their own experiences, and also go into the code a little bit and actually look at different types of algorithms and try to understand, as a manager, what do you need to take away from this code and how can you actually work together with people who are working on code all the time. I wanted to bring to your attention a few research projects which go well with what Manoj was talking about earlier in terms of the two domains where he's focusing on. And these research projects are currently underway at INSEAD, and we can talk about the recent pandemic, the recent situation, in many ways through the lens of these different projects. So if you look at the bottom left of this slide, one of the projects here I have listed is this human machine system for scalable content filtering. So one thing that happened with the pandemic is that especially at the very early stages, there was a lot of information being posted on social media platforms like Facebook. And these social media platforms have the challenge of appropriately filtering this content to determine which content is actually useful and which could potentially be some form of misinformation and might actually lead to more damage than good. The issue is, however, is that on Facebook, people are posting over 1 billion posts in a single hour. So clearly humans, and especially in this case where we're dealing with something which is so technical and so scientific, where you might need experts to actually evaluate these things, we might not be able to do this at scale. So for this class of problems, we're actually investigating ways to develop systems where we can augment the humans in some way and scalably evaluate different pieces of content. And another topic that I want to mention is this idea of explaining algorithmic decisions to customers. So some countries have implemented applications which actually make decisions on the basis of some of your behavior as to whether or not you should go to a doctor or whether or not you should quarantine potentially. And customers may have questions about why they received a particular decision, especially if it was a negative one. So in another stream of research, we're investigating how to best communicate what algorithms are doing to customers. Then finally, I have here listed AI blockchain interface, but this is some experimental work which is still in the early stages. And then finally, I want to bring to your attention these recent case studies that we published. So Preferred Networks, this is a case study about a company which is implementing deep learning technologies and which recently got the #1 position for developing the most energy efficient supercomputer in the world. So the computer that can make the most computations given the smallest amount of energy. And as a company which is really heavy in deep learning, which is really heavily invested in deep learning, how can we take this talent and this research and actually convert it into real business use cases? And then the other case here about building a world of personal AI avatars, maybe in the near future, if we continue this trend of social distancing, we may all tend to meet more in some kind of a virtual space, and it might actually become more relevant to think about what does our existence look like if we no longer interact as much as we do in the real world, but maybe move more to virtual
And we don't
spaces.
have your classes anymore. You'll have to find new pictures for us.
Absolutely, absolutely. So that's it for me. Very happy to jump in further into this interesting conversation.
Great, thank you both very much for being here today. And because I want to make this as interactive as possible with our audience, I'd love to sort of kick this off with a survey question to everyone. I think there are about 135 people here right now. And so if we could launch our sort of first question, which was really about, is AI fulfilling its promise to save us from COVID-19? And I'd love to sort of get a sense from everyone in the room, or virtual room, what your sense is. But as we wait sort of for the response, I think from a human and sort of an economic and social standpoint, COVID-19 has definitely led us into uncharted waters. And of course, just like in history, technology is naturally playing a role in helping respond. And more than other technologies, AI is definitely one of the most promising and interesting ones. So I'd like to ask both of our panelists, sort of, what is it about AI? Why is AI standing right now as sort of one of these technologies that people are so excited about? And actually would love, now that we've got the responses, love to also for you to comment on the responses. I think, I think there's a sort of a huge, most people sort of neither agreeing or disagreeing. I think, AI is just sort of neutral around AI here right now. So either one of you wants to sort of kick off your reaction to this and sort of share your thoughts on, how you say why you see AI being relevant right now in the fight against COVID. And I just want to be clear, my question isn't just about COVID from a medical standpoint. It's really about, our whole world, the whole world right now, and sort of addressing some of the issues we're facing on a global scale.
Sure. Pavel, is it okay if I went first? So I think one of the fundamental reasons people are excited about AI is what AI represents as a capability. It's the capability of machines and systems to be able to detect patterns and learn from those patterns. And, unlike anything else we have built in the last 90 years, everything was rules-based, and rules don't learn. AI systems have this unique capability of being a non-biological intelligence that can understand patterns and learn from those patterns. And if you look at how our world has changed because of this pandemic, everything that are used to doing is now changing. The way we go to a bank to get our money, the way we get a loan, the way we go to school. And so there is a significant amount of disruption in how behaviors are changing and how products and services are being delivered, everything from education to medicine to finance. And businesses and governments are trying to make sense of this. And the great way that AI can represent this capability to scale, to Pavel's point on scaling human capability by using machines to make sense of these data and to be able to then drive the right set of products and services. So at a broad level, that's the excitement around AI. However, I must say that currently, and the survey I think is spot on, the results of the survey, currently the hype and expectations about AI has exceeded what AI truly is doing today. And we'll get into later on how I believe AI is going to start having a impact on this pandemic across the economy. But broadly, I think that's why the excitement is the capability to understand and learn from patterns.
Pavel, do you want to?
Yeah, so very interesting, Manoj, and I agree with that. So definitely we've seen over the past decade, or perhaps even more, several tech demos or demonstrations of applications of AI in simulated environments. Think, for example, of DeepMind's applications of artificial intelligence, playing different types of games. And these applications these demonstrations have really showed us that this technology can do something incredible, but in simulated environments. So then we've been trying to apply these in practice. And there, across several industries, we've also seen pretty incredible improvements thanks to artificial intelligence. Some of the retail companies that I've worked with, we've actually seen the possibility of machine learning technologies when applied to, for example, optimize pricing algorithms or optimize fraud detection algorithms. We've seen improvements on the order of millions or tens of millions of dollars that can be achieved thanks to these types of optimizations. So over the past decade, we've really seen both from a tech demo perspective, which is accessible to a very wide audience, what AI can do, and also from a very specific industry type application perspective within some verticals that artificial intelligence can lead to boosts to the bottom line. And so now the big question is, when customer behavior changes, what happens?
Yeah, so with that, like, customer behavior drastically changed. There was, with COVID, I mean, just even take consumer, the basic, if you look at on Amazon, what the top typical searches are, definitely toilet paper has not been number one, masks and gloves. And within, a few days, those became sort of some of the top searches. And that, I believe, had huge implications along the entire value chain for companies that are already leveraging or using AI technologies. So supply chain management, pricing, as you said, fraud detection, et cetera, et cetera. So with this, did it highlight more? Did people realize to what extent AI tools might already be present in at least in the back-end systems? And number two, are these systems, what can we do to make them a little bit more capable of withstanding sort of sudden human behavior changes? And what are sort of lessons learned you have for businesses as they move forward, trying to, scale and use AI further down the road?
In terms of what I'm seeing in the market and in customer it's a tale of two cities. There's a lot of excitement about AI, but there is also a lot of recognition that it's still in early stages. It's very hard to get value out of AI for a variety of reasons, data being one of them, ethical and appropriate use of AI being another one of them. But to build on your supply chain comment, what is obvious to everyone is across the entire supply chain, value chain, from sourcing and partners to the back office work to the front office engagement, AI is going to have a significant impact. And I'm already seeing areas across, I'm just going to pick two industries, healthcare and financial services. I'm already seeing, the obvious one is outbreak detection and predicting when certain beds in certain emergency rooms are going to run out. So there is I call it the low hanging fruit of AI, is just use AI to start detecting where you're likely to get out of capacity. But the more interesting stuff is beginning to happen in the next stage, which is around helping people get augmented with AI. I call it putting an Iron Man Jarvis suit on every knowledge worker. So one of the things that's happening with AI are companies are getting inundated with phone calls. So call centers are getting inundated, and more of the call center people are not together. So how do you make sure that AI can tap you on the shoulder and guide you through a particular response in a way that gives you the expertise in time at that moment? So I call this AI equals augmented intelligence. So to me, there are three types of AI. There is automated AI, which is like robotic process automation, where you write something and you can, and that's not truly AI, it's mostly, simple script. Then there is augmented intelligence, where you augment, and this is where I think is the most exciting capability. And then third one is autonomous, which is like self-driving cars and self-flying drones. And where I'm seeing a lot of exciting opportunities in the area of augmented intelligence. In the case of one large healthcare company, their mission was to use AI to move from reactive healthcare to proactive and predictive healthcare. So what they have started doing now, and when a person calls into a call center, the AI starts saying, it is Susan Miller. She's probably calling you about a claim, and it's probably this claim, and it's line item number 74 that she's going to ask about. And then here's the answer you give her as to why her charges were higher. And that kind of an information, we have done this for over 100 million phone calls now. And we have found a reduction in average handling time because the person is getting in context insights from the AI saying, here's what you got to do to get this to a successful resolution. So it reduces the call time. It also increases customer satisfaction. Now we are bringing the same stuff into chatbots. So people can start asking a chatbot from a Google or a Watson or a Facebook questions, and the system can start intelligently understanding and engaging. So I think there are things like that which we're just getting going. I have half a dozen other examples of how over the next 2 to 3 years this is going to play out. But I think it's early days and there's a lot of exciting stuff coming our way.
But you know, the sort of examples you're sharing are examples that are using data and history that we've had for a very long, you know, that companies have been sort of gathering for a while. And I think, love to hear both of you, your thoughts on sort of what I found interesting with COVID is suddenly, you know, when we think about AI, you know, they're definitely the notion, you know, you always talk about, you know, the algorithms, the computing power and the data. And suddenly we had, you know, this COVID, and we had little understanding of how the virus and how the virus works, its behavior, no real sense of sort of known outcomes, sort of something that you sometimes need in order to sort of train. And so, you know, we've seen sort of so much research come out. And then as Pavel, you pointed out, often sort of like, you know, not at scale, but really just sort of small research projects that, but still, does it even make sense to talk about AI being used today in an AI, in a COVID, you know, in the COVID context? Do we even have that back, you know, that, are we able to step back enough to be able to build algorithms that even make sense?
Pavel, you want to go first?
Yeah, so I think this is very interesting. And I think that this point actually highlights one of the key limitations of machine learning models, especially those that are very heavily data-driven and don't really incorporate a lot of information about kind of a theory which guides sort of the laws which determine how things happen in the world. And these models have shown incredible performance over the past years in an environment that was relatively stable. So for an environment that's stable, if the processes which describe how the data are generated that we observe remain sort of stable over time, then these models tend to perform very well because they're very good at interpolation. But when we start having to extrapolate and go from one particular environment to make predictions in a different one, things can start to fail. But this actually highlights this limitation. So we saw this limitation in practice. Just an example of that is when I was shopping on Amazon to get this microphone that I'm using right now, a few months ago, in order to teach online, I had to scroll down through something like 20 pages until I found the listing for a microphone that was available within a week. And before that, all of the other microphones were only available months in the future, in October and November or something like that. So this was an example of how some algorithms, maybe there's some machine learning being used in there as a component, but these algorithms didn't really adapt quickly enough to the preferences of some of the customers in this new environment. So it's a really, really interesting research area to figure out how can we actually make machine learning models more robust in such cases. Like, what can we do to actually make these models perform well, even if we're in an environment that's not very stable? And I think this ties into Manoj's point about augmented intelligence. So humans can help with this. This is a place where humans can actually help quite a bit. When the environment changes, can we actually use information from some human experts to guide the models and put them in the right direction? But these systems are still somewhat in their infancy, so they can't react quickly enough. So I think that's definitely a very interesting sort of area of research, an area where we can improve machine learning.
What about, you know, more and more companies sort of buying sort of off-the-shelf AI solutions? And so do they have enough human know-how, people on the, you know, available to sort of jump in when needed or things? And maybe Manoj, in your experience in you know, consulting, like what is one of the recommendations you have for businesses that are implementing it? What type of teams do you need, and what do you need in order to make sure that, you know, it's not, oh, I've implemented an AI system and I walk away and it's working? I mean, we just saw the crisis definitely showed that overnight all our assumptions go out the window?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. And frankly, this notion of off-the-shelf AI system is somewhat of a myth. Because at the end of the day, at best, what you can have is a brain of a 12-year-old or a 14-year-old if you use AI as a digital brain. But you still need to, just like you bring in an employee and you train the employee in your own environment to understand your business processes, you understand your corporate policies. Similarly, systems in AI have to be brought in, and you can't just flip a switch on it and say, go. You have to be able to make that particular AI understand the domain, understand your processes and policies. So there is a lot of work still being done around this notion of a vertical specific AI. Because one of the first insights I had when I was running Watson was, in order for an AI to learn, it needs to understand the domain. A context is incredibly important for an AI to understand, because the word coupon means something different in financial services versus the word coupon in retail. So how does an AI figure that out? So I think there is a lot of work being done around these operationalization of what I call as trusted AI systems. And they go through these 4 stages. I call it the dial loop. It's more from cognitive scale than me. It's the data to insight to action to learning. And data is the fuel that drives AI. So garbage in is garbage out. If you don't have proper data, and one of the reasons people are using AI for call center is they have a lot of data that's coming in that they can train the AI on, because some of these customers do tens and hundreds of millions of phone calls, and being able to use that to train. So data is one part. Insights, to Pavel's point, is the coming out with the prediction. Where I think the research and frankly the opportunity is how do you take a prediction and convert that into a personalized prescription? And then how do you convert that into a deduction so your prediction gets better? So most of the AI work in machine learning today is focused on prediction, not enough on prescription. And prescription means you have to understand and personalize a given prediction to a given individual for a given context to nudge an action. So it's moving from insights to action, and then from action to learning. So I would argue that a lot of the machine learning research has been focused on the data and insights part of the data dial loop, and not enough on the action and learning part of the dial loop. And I think that's where some of the exciting and promising startups are beginning to look into now. Because even if you had the world's all possible data, even if you had the smartest algorithm, if you cannot personalize, to Pavel's point about going to 20 pages down to find that microphone, if that AI cannot understand me and engage me and learn from me, I'm going to lose interest in that. So I think there is a kind of an emergence of, I call it business and outcome specific AI rather than data and machine learning specific AI. We've had a lot of investments on the technology of AI, but not enough on the business of AI.
So that brings me to a question. What's your recommendation to organizations when they're putting together AI teams? You talked sort of about a domain expertise, and I would say even in the AI, I mean, in the COVID situation, where people sort of said you can't do COVID modeling without having, sociologists, economists, epidemiologists. You need this, pluridisciplinary team. So how does that translate into an organization or business? So when you're advising, in some of your clients, what's your best recommendation for them on how to put these teams together?
Well,
go ahead, Manoj.
Okay, so this is a topic that I've been spending a lot of time over the last 5 or 6 years. I must have done 50 or 60 talks last year with the C-level, and my message to them, there are 4 points I make to them. One is AI is too strategic to be left to technologists. Okay, AI is a business capability, a strategic business capability. It is not just an IT or a data science capability. So really helping them understand what AI is from a business capability perspective. So the education part is very critical. Second, I tell them is start with the business outcomes and impact on human beings. Don't start with data and machine learning first. Start with impact and outcomes first, so that you know what processes and what use cases in your domain AI is going to have the most value in. Because if you have a hammer in hand, everything looks like a nail. And just because you got AI doesn't mean all domains are going to be equally valuable in terms of getting the value from AI. So that's the second one, is Start with a use case and business outcome. The third part is don't look at just automation, look at automation and augmentation. I believe a big portion of AI's value is going to be building these personalized Iron Man Jarvis suits for every employee, whether you're in HR or finance, just like webified every process for all knowledge workers 25 years ago. I believe cloud and AI and big data are going to cognitize all of us. So we will have, and Pavel's personalized avatars is a step in the right direction, right? It's how do you engage it? So that's the third one, is look at automation and augmentation. And last but not the least, look at the ethical and responsible applications of this. There is an opportunity for companies to build better customer trust and better customer engagement by explaining how the AI is being used, how your data is being used. With COVID, more and more data being shared, it's imperative for companies to start building trust and explainability into these systems. And also to make sure that you're complying with the regulations. There are lawsuits. I believe there's going to be hundreds of lawsuits coming out over the next 2 to 3 years around improper use of automated decisioning system. I don't call it AI systems because a lot of these models are not AI models. They could be statistical models. And most of them are operating as black boxes. So the last point I make to them is make sure to use the ethical and responsible implications of whatever you're doing. And that's where the cross-functional team comes in, Joanna, is the ability to get different domains, lawyers and machine learning people and product managers and call center people. They should all be sitting together and looking at these AI use cases.
And I think we'll go into sort of ethics in a second, but Pavel, I want to ask you, what, as you teach these have you started teaching this course at INSEAD, what has struck you, when you tell students you need to go in and dig in and understand, as you mentioned earlier, like understand the technology behind it. Are they surprised that you're asking them to do this in an MBA course, or what's the reaction?
So increasingly in the course, we've had students who are more and more technically sophisticated. And I think this is because there is just a growing interest in these topics, and students understand that they have to be AI literate and familiar with some machine learning concepts, at least at a very basic level. When they go into the workforce, if they want to build their own companies, they have to understand these concepts. So increasingly over time, as I've taught this course, over 2 years, I've seen that the backgrounds of the students have really increased in terms of what they come in with directly. So I've had students who've worked at NVIDIA in the graphics processing units division, a student who worked at IBM Watson actually as a deep learning researcher. And increasingly we have students like this actually taking this course. And I think our objective is really to make sure that we provide the right level of education and the right type of education such that when these students go into practice, they can integrate into the framework that Manoj described, and they understand these different components of what it means to deploy artificial intelligence in real organizations. So I think from the perspective of business education, the good news is that we are seeing increasingly more sophisticated students technologically in the classes. And because of that, there is an increasing interest in actually diving into some of these algorithms and even developing their own algorithms. Even if the students don't intend to be algorithm developers in the future, they're very interested in testing this out and making sure they understand how things work.
So this is going to lead me, I know, to sort of an area that I think is, you're very passionate about this, Manoj, which is really the ethics in AI. And I think, I have a survey. I'd love us if we could. There's a survey question that we have around this, which is, how significant of a role does ethics play when using AI to address this pandemic and future pandemics? And the reason I think when we were preparing the three of us sort of our discussion today was really this idea that, AI could, everybody talks about AI for good, but I think we were suddenly, faced with certain decisions, and our systems didn't really know how to react. When do you decide which life to save suddenly in a COVID situation, and things like that. So we'd love to sort of get the feedback from everybody that's with us today, and sort of your thoughts on how important ethics plays. And then love to get sort of your thoughts, both of you, on so there we go. Very significant. So Manoj, you must be quite happy. That's, 63%.
This is, yeah, absolutely satisfying to see that, because 4 years ago when I was talking about it, I used to get this look of, I call it dogs watching TV. People used to look at me like this and say, what is it you're talking about? Ethics and AI. But my journey on this, Joanna, started about 7 years ago when I took on Watson from IBM Research, and I was given a large amount of money, the IBM CEO, and told, go build a business. And as I started talking to customers, one question that kept coming up is, how do I trust Watson? So I started wanting to apply for cancer. And the radiologist said to me, he said, it's one thing for you to say, Watson answered the questions right on Jeopardy. It's another thing for me to treat a cancer patient and trust in the system. So can the system explain itself? That was the first question. Then second question was, about a few months later in Washington, D.C., one of the people in the audience told me, oh, you're building the Obama death panel machine, because this machine is going to decide whether my wife, who has a cancer, is going to live or die. So it started really hitting me the significance of what we were doing with AI. Is we had this obsession about automating decisions. And that's where I started thinking about, how do you really get AI to be beneficial for the society, right? And beneficial means to me three things. Number one, it has to have performance in the sense that it needs to make our lives better. Number two, it needs to be able to be trusted, and then only it'll get adopted. Can I explain myself? And number three is, it has to be seen as something that is an integral part of my life. Today, try living without a phone or a web or a Wi-Fi. They have become integral to your life. And so how do you get AI to that point? And when you start unbundling this, what I've realized is the conversation with businesses has to be put in terms of business context. Unfortunately, money is what drives the work. And in fact, I stopped using the term ethical AI, because the moment I use the word ethical AI, some CEOs used to tell me, what do you mean? Of course we are ethical. You mean to say I need ethical AI? We are ethical as a company. That's why I started using the word responsible AI and trusted AI. And then my conversation was not about that. My conversation now was, we are moving to a world where more and more decisions are being given to a machine. Everything from what TV programs I watch, to who I date, to what school I go to what loan I get approved for, and what quality of care I get in healthcare. So how do you make sure these machines, these digital brains, are explainable? Because there's one thing, I separate AI as B2C AI and B2B AI. It's one thing to use a deep learning model and say it's a dog or a cat and get away with it. It's another thing to say, I used a set of models, I denied a claim, a patient died, and I'm now getting sued for $40 million, but I can't explain why my machine did what it did. So then I started getting the attention of the C-level to say, okay, now I'm talking about, hey, can AI be used to improve your claims process? Also, can it be used to keep you out of jail because you don't look in an orange jumpsuit? And how do you make sure, last but not the least, you use AI to build trust with your customers? How do I know my chatbot is not racist, right? How do I know that, in America, about 6 months ago, there was a big study that came out that a black family of 4 making $160,000 were given the same amount of mortgage credit as a white family of 4 making $40,000. And when you ask the bank, they say, well, it's a proprietary model, I can't explain it to you, right? So we've started building tools in cognitive scale around, I call it a Norton antivirus of trust. So just like you had a Norton antivirus of security, we are now building a Norton antivirus of trust. And Pavel would really understand and get excited about it. We're using techniques like counterfactual evaluations, counterfactual explanations, to create like a FICO-like score for models and data. Without having to know the internals of the model, we can give you a risk score on your model. So I think tools like that is what needs to come in, but the conversation has to be around human impact, business impact, and the opportunity, and not just a feel-good, do-good AI, because I'm finding that that conversation doesn't go too far.
Pavel, do you want to react to that?
Yeah,
or?
I think that's extremely interesting. And this work that you mentioned about developing sort of a scalable solution to evaluate different models is extremely interesting. because most of the work I'm aware of so far in the world of explainable artificial intelligence tends to be targeted towards specific companies. So for example, as a form of consulting for a bank, this bank might be interested in discovering what are some of the risk factors that they need to be aware of when they deploy their credit scoring algorithm.
Yeah.
But it would be very interesting to see something scalable, which can potentially be applied across different industries, across different models as a product in this world of, as we call it, trusted AI. Another thing that I want to add as well on the discussion about ethics and artificial intelligence, I think that for this especially, it's very important for companies who consider hiring people to work on AI systems to look not just within some narrow specializations of machine learning, but to consider people who have experiences outside of this area as well. For example, people who have worked on economics problems, but also machine learning, or people in psychology, or people in social sciences more broadly, with machine learning background and experience working on machine learning models. So I think from a perspective of companies that may be interested in finding talent for artificial intelligence research or the development of these algorithms, really looking across fields is quite important to make sure that there's this 360-degree perspective on what the algorithms are doing, how they're treating different types of people, and how to communicate exactly what these algorithms are doing to the customers of the company.
That's an incredibly important point. And if I could add to that, Joanna, I think one of the analogies I use with my CEOs of the various companies I've invested in is think of it as an orchestra and a symphony. Right now, there is too much focus on the pianist, who is the machine learning creator. But really, it's a whole orchestra that you need to bring together, because you got to bring the product managers, the sociologists, the behavioral sociologists, the legal, risk and compliance people. And we are over-indexed. I continue to believe that we are looking at AI through the wrong end of the pipe. We are looking at AI as a set of numbers and rows and columns and models and images, but not as human and business value. There's nothing artificial about AI. It's real, it's impacting people, it's impacting lives, and it needs to be viewed in the lens of how it impacts. And Ashley here, if you have some time later on, Ashley had a couple of very good questions here around this human in the loop feedback that we should go back to towards the end, because I believe that's the trick in making AI scale, is building and bringing the human in the loop.
So there have been quite a few big tech companies even recently sort of making pledges around, responsible AI and ethical AI. And now if I take the COVID example, and, some of these big tech companies also sort of saying, we're going to go out and we're going to create contact tracing apps. And, that was supposed to be sort of the modern method of containing this virus. And globally, it's been a pretty big flop. Yep. Is it because people have been brainwashed with this ethics and you're going to do good? In the past 2-3 years, we've just seen technology companies, one scandal after another. What's it going to take to recreate trust? And can AI help us recreate trust with these systems?
I think there are 3 things that are going on here. One is you've got a lot of companies using the words, right? Saying ethical AI, responsible AI. And there are a lot of what I call as think tanks. There are very few do tanks, right? There are a lot of people talking about stuff, publishing papers. People are getting smarter, but they're not getting richer from ethical AI. By richer, I mean not just making money, but being beneficial for society. So there is that. And that's one of the reasons, 3 years ago, I started this nonprofit called AI Global. And we called it the Responsible AI Do Tank. We are going to create open source tools that actually can be used for people to do model scanning. And we have shown like over 5,000 features can be scanned over millions of rows, and you can still come out with detection of what the risk is in that model. So one is how do you have more of do tanks on responsible AI and fewer of think tanks? The second part that's happening is where there is do tank or tools that are being created, they're being created from a very myopic lens of explainable AI for a machine learning person. And the reality is when you build a quote unquote AI system, you're orchestrating machine learning models, analytics models from SPSS, and rule system. And you need explainability across all these classes of models. And there are no tools being built for that. Tools are only being built for machine learning explainability. It's like having my car dashboard only telling me about my tire pressure and asking me to win the race. I need to know other measurements too, and there is no integrated view because we are looking at it as a machine learning out problem and not a business outcome and human impact in problem. That's the second part. And third is there are some classes of companies that are coming up who are, I believe, taking a enterprise and human-centric view of AI. And I don't want to mention any names because I'll come across as self-promoting. But there are companies that are coming up and they're realizing that we have to move AI from academics to economics. And to do that, we need to start with people and human first, just like we did with the web.
So I want to sort of step back again, and this is a problem that before the pandemic was something actually, Manoj, you and I had spoken about at one point, which is this notion of over the past few years, we've seen a ton of companies sort of deploy proof of concepts around AI in their organizations. And I think what we saw with this in the past few months with the AI pandemic is one, published every other day, research being published saying this AI study shows X, Y, this impact X, Y, Z. But as soon as we ended up taking it out, and Pavel, you sort of brought this up earlier, taking it out of sort of a space, a constrained space and one that you can control space, suddenly scaling on, here's a pandemic that's global in scale, that's impacting the whole world. Are the, how do you take these these initial, proof of concepts and scale them, and what are some of the challenges? And I'd love to sort of get your thoughts of, did you learn anything new in the past did either one of you learn anything new with what happened with COVID around this? And what, and again, so many companies are trying to sort of scale AI problems. So what would be your recommendation for them right now? And either one of you can sort of start out.
Go ahead, Manoj.
Okay, so I think there's a lot that we have learned. We have learned about both the potential as well as the limitations of AI. And I think this pandemic is not going away anywhere. I mean, this is going to be with us for the next 3 to 5 years. Hopefully, even with the vaccine, there's going to be a lot of people requiring a lot of care financially and healthcare wise that AI is going to be used. So I look at what happens with this pandemic in 3 stages. I call it, right now we are responding. We call it respond, recover, and renew. So response is what we are doing right now, and response is the next 6 to 9 months. Recover is hopefully the next 12 to 24 months when we start. It may take longer for places like Texas and US, but I'd say that tongue in cheek, but hopefully the elections will fix it. But respond, recover, and renew renewal is 24 months out. I think as you go through these 3 stages, AI is going to play a bigger and bigger role. And part of it is we're going to have better quality data to start managing and really implementing it. Second is companies are going to really start understanding where are the hotspots. Where do we really apply AI, and where is it that good old-fashioned analytics models or a human intelligence is what's needed. And I also think that policymakers and government officials are going to start getting more trust into AI when they start seeing results. Because right now, unfortunately, it's become a political issue in some countries rather than a science issue. And there is an opportunity through trusted AI to build policymaker and decision maker confidence in relying on AI and being able to make some of these. And this is where, again, the importance of trusted AI or ethical AI is going to even go higher in the coming months and years.
Just to add to that, I think industry academia collaboration is very crucial to make sure that proof of concepts can go from research to real application. And I think in a business school, we're in a good position for these types of collaborations. But of course, the issue is if research is developed in the context of a simulation, in the context of a vacuum, it may be a big challenge to convert that into something which is practically relevant, which can be scaled well, and which is robust to what we see happening right now, these types of events. So I just wanted to add that I think these types of collaborations are really key, regardless of whether there is a pandemic or not, in making sure that proof of concepts from research go to practice in the most efficient way.
Can I build on that? I think in addition to collaboration, the other thing, and there's a question also on this from Nirman Varwala around education. How do we start including elements of AI in the medical school curriculum, for that matter, business school curriculum? What Pavel is doing is just that. So I have been not at the level of Pavel. Last 3 years, I've been teaching at the University of Texas in Austin, a new course that I've created. It's a course that's available across all schools called Designing Ethical and Responsible AI Systems. And when I took on Watson, one of the first decisions we made after saying where to apply it was, let's start putting education programs in universities. When I left, we had 200 universities where we were going and giving this course material. I believe at the last count, it was over 1,600 universities now. So I believe educating, in addition to collaborating, educating the next generation of doctors and lawyers and business school people, not just the computer scientists, around the importance of AI is incredibly important, and the strategy of AI. And that's why I'm very excited and also curious to follow up with Pavel on the work he's doing, because you're shaping the next generation right now.
So with, when you look back at sort of AI adoption, digital transformation, and you look at, the McKinsey, projections, the PricewaterhouseCoopers, Accenture's, and all of them. But one of the things we kept on hearing was, from at least executives, was it's slow, it's taking longer than we expected. It's slower than we expected. COVID hits, firms like IKEA, for instance, overnight, really rethought their entire, what they thought would take 3 to 4 years in terms of digital transformation happen in 2 weeks. But then I'm going to guess, and that's a question for you, Pavel, are they asking all the right questions? What are the big questions you think they should be asking to make, because are we going to have a backlash, and suddenly they're going to say in a year's time, not having the impact we thought it should be having, and do we risk sort of having sort of a backlash again, or sort of, some might not say an AI winter, but an AI autumn?
My expectation is that actually artificial intelligence deployment efforts should accelerate in the next few months. And the reason for that is that the pandemic has really put our focus more heavily on what's going on in the digital world. So we started spending more time thinking about what kinds of digital assets do we have. And data is perhaps the most important digital asset that a company might have access to. Yep. So I think that AI tends to go hand in hand with digital transformation. These two things are almost very closely interrelated.
So actually, I'd love to sort of, we had a last survey question. It'd be very interesting to sort of get people's feedback on this, which was, do you expect companies to accelerate the investment in AI in the next year or not? And I'd just love to, as you continue talking about this, sort of getting the participants' feedback on this.
Right. So ignore my opinion. Just give your opinion.
But Manoj might have a different one.
I don't influence anyone.
You anchored. You might have anchored the results.
Oh.
Exactly.
Oh.
But continue.
Well, there we go. There's the anchoring.
Professor is validated.
Fantastic, fantastic.
Yeah, but just to build on that a little bit, I really do think that the pandemic is in some way a forced digital transformation. Companies were forced to do the things they may have been planning to do for a very long time, but were hesitant to do because of the required investments. And artificial intelligence really goes hand in hand with that. Companies become more aware of their data assets, and they become more aware of the value they can create from these data assets. Now, I should add a small caveat as well. I've heard that several companies have also frozen some proof of concepts that they have been doing in artificial intelligence, because these are viewed as an investment that may end up being risky. So this is something which goes a bit in the other direction as well, but it's really key for companies in that context to make sure that they can identify what are really the applications of AI that are relevant for them and that can really drive performance improvements, and that can lead to really big innovations for this company.
Manoj, what do you say? What's your take?
AI has become the frontier for digital transformation. So when people use the word digital transformation, they think AI. When I say AI, I also don't mean machine learning. When I talk about AI, I talk about the super convergence of the big six. It's machine learning, it's cloud, it's big data, it is social, it is IoT, and also it's blockchain. I believe blockchain is going to have a very important role down the line in AI. It's going to in enforcing trust. And there was a question about 5G and IoT and the role. I absolutely believe is going to have an incredibly important role to play, because it's all about the two parts we discussed. You know, it's about compute, the cloud part. So 5G is going to give you faster speed and faster compute for the brain to work faster. And then IoT is going to give us more data and richer data. So one of the bad things, I think a horrible thing the technology industry has done is we have gone and sold technologies and not outcomes. We go to the CIO and CEO and say, oh, let me talk to you about a hybrid cloud. 2 years before it was, let me talk to you about mobile. Then it is about blockchain. Then it is about IoT, and then it's about 5G. It's like instead of selling the whole concert and symphony, you're selling the bass player and the piano and the flutist, and not telling them the kind of music that they can compose by orchestrating all these technologies together. And I think that's where the real genius is, and that's where the real winners of next few years are going to come out. But there is no doubt that this COVID, this pandemic, is going to unleash this Cambrian innovation of technology and applications, on the scale of probably what World War II did. This is going to change us in ways we don't even know how. But I also know that post World War II, how economies were transformed. Post COVID, economies and digital is definitely going to be transformed.
Pavel, just curiosity, how do you see AI? You're in the academia world. Do you see AI changing the future of academia and universities?
Sure. So in many ways, artificial intelligence can be used by the academic community. Of course, research is the area where this is all being integrated increasingly across different fields. So whereas previously, in some fields, like in economics, for example, using machine learning models was not so common. Now, increasingly, we see that economics researchers are incorporating these techniques into the work that they're doing. And this is an incredibly interesting area, because the two fields have been sort of going in different directions in a certain sense. Economics has been focusing on cause and effect, really on this type of causal inference type approach to data analysis. Whereas in the machine learning world, we're doing predictions. We're really fitting distributions, fitting functions. So it's really interesting to see from the academic research side how these things are blending across fields. From the teaching side, I think there are interesting ways to apply artificial intelligence to scale teaching, to make teaching more scalable while maintaining the same level of quality, or to increase the level of quality at the same level of scale. And I think for these types of applications, for example, as I was teaching on Zoom this past semester, it's incredible what kind of data is available from the class. The chatting that's happening, the questions that are being asked in the chat boxes. I think that in the future, this type of information can be used to better assess and sort of customize the course to different students' expectations, different student type of questions that they're asking. So I think that artificial intelligence can definitely be applied in the teaching world as well, and make teaching more accessible to a bigger audience. People have different backgrounds, they have different topics that they're interested in, and different fields that they're going to go work in the future. So if we can customize this and really scale these courses using some techniques from artificial intelligence and analyzing these data that are being generated through Zoom, for example, I think that could be incredibly interesting.
So out of respect for everyone's time, I think we're almost at the end. I think what I find interesting, and what I think this, through our discussion today, and even and it was bubbling up before this COVID happened, was this expectation that AI was going to have an impact overnight. And I think COVID sort of demonstrated again, from what I gather, from our conversation, is that it has huge potential. You both, I think, are extremely optimistic about the future of AI, but also that it doesn't happen overnight. And I think, I think that's really sort of one of the things I'm hearing. So what's a recommendation to business executives that, right now are in a situation where for sure media saying, the sense is digital transformation is a go. You can't even not think about it right now. You have to move forward. And, AI, and start implementing AI. What's a realistic expectation for them moving forward in the next year of how quickly they're going to be able to do things with AI?
I'll make it quick. I think two things. One is if you're not doing it already, start piloting, and I would be surprised if, most companies are not doing it. Gartner thinks that over 85% companies are piloting or playing with AI. So I think it's the learning part. And second is there are a lot of low-hanging fruits that you can actually apply AI to areas like call centers and, predictions to, engage your customers better. So learn about it and both get smarter and get richer.
And I'll just quickly second what Manoj said. Definitely lots of low-hanging fruits, but also I think opportunities to experiment and identify interesting domains in the company where you may not have considered before, but AI might actually have a big impact there.
Well, I want to thank you both very, very much for this amazing conversation, and thank everyone for joining us today. And as you both sort of said, learning is a huge part of this. So please continue looking into everything INSEAD is doing around AI and innovation and digitization. And I think they've sort of shared some of the areas where you can go and look into more of what INSEAD's doing right now. So thank you all very much, and have a wonderful day.